Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Tami, and I'm an alcoholic. And I'm grateful to be here this morning. Heck, I'm grateful to be anywhere this morning sober. And I was going to open up with a riddle. How many hours and flights does it take to get from Los Angeles to Syracuse? But he kind of broke my riddle. So, you know, it's always a privilege and an honor to participate in an Alcoholics Anonymous event. And I want you to know that I'm here through great inconvenience. No, I'm kidding. You know, I have an 83-year-old mom that just moved in with us. We're taking care of her. She's in failing health after my dad passed away 2 years ago. And my mom, for the life of her, cannot understand why we do this, you know. And I want to also, before I even start, I want to thank Dwayne, Scott, and the committee for asking me to come out here today. And I want to thank my friend Doug, who showed up at the airport last night after 18 long hours. It was really good to see a familiar face. And, of course, to see Mari. And, you know, that comes to mean a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous. And Doug's going to be flying back with me. We both come from L.A. And, you know, these are lifelong friends that we make in Alcoholics Anonymous. And, you know, my mom, for the life of her, cannot understand, first of all, why anybody would want to hear anything I have to say, let alone pay for an airfare and a hotel. And even this morning, you know, I talked to her just to make sure she was doing okay. And, you know, she went on about this, you know, recent news with a celebrity in Hollywood that just lost their life. And my mom kept saying, you know, I don't know why you go out in the snow and all these airports and you work so many hours during the week and you've got so many other responsibilities. And she said, and then she starts talking about this event on the news, and she says, you know, I just don't understand. She was doing so well and she was having a comeback. And I said, you know, Mom, dead is dead, and there are no more comebacks. And that's why I'm in Syracuse right now, because there may be someone in the room tonight that has a shot at a comeback. And for God's sakes, if you're one of those people in the room tonight that has a shot of recovering from this thing we call alcoholism, that's why I'm here tonight. And that's why when I was coming up in Alcoholics Anonymous, I went and heard Doug and Mari and all the speakers that carried the message to me when I was new. And so, you know, that's why we're here, and that's why we do what we do. You know, I'll just tell you really briefly, one of the reasons I missed a flight, somehow, I don't know when or where it happened, you guys taught me how to do the next indicated thing. And I've been hearing that my whole sobriety, but I got off a plane in Chicago, and we were delayed in Los Angeles 40 minutes before we even took off. So, of course, we landed late in Chicago. And there was an 84-year-old woman on the plane, and she was in a wheelchair, and she just reminded me of my mother. When we all got off the plane, there were 7 of us that needed to go to gate G, and I had no idea. You know, H and G sound real familiar. I got off at H. Well, they sound close. They're not in Chicago, I'll tell you that. And there were 7 of us all of a sudden that had to go to gate G, which is like, you know, a marathon run. And 5 of them took off really fast to go make that gate. And another woman and I are looking at this lady in a wheelchair, and she's all alone, and she's scared, and she's shaking. And I thought, heck, you know, if I stop and help her, I'm going to miss this convention, or I could miss it. I'm going to miss my flight. And I'm looking at her, and I'm thinking, you know, what have you people taught me to do? And that's to just help another human being, and this lady needed help. So this other woman and I stayed with this woman, and we got her a wheelchair, and we got her to the gate. And the best news was not only did we miss our flight, but the other 5 buttheads that ran and left her lost their flight too. So anyway, I'll go ahead and give you a quick AA resume. I have 18 years of sobriety. For those of you that are mathematically challenged, my sobriety date is April 24th, 1993. My home group is the Pacific Group, and I've currently picked up Clancy this last year as a sponsor. And sometimes we need to do that in sobriety. I had some things going on, the death of a father, the end of a long-term marriage, illness of a mother, and I needed somebody that's voice was a whole lot louder than mine as a sponsor, and I'm really grateful to him. That's worked out really well for me. I had my first drink at 13, and I've come to understand after reading this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, that I had an incredibly strange reaction to alcohol the very first time I ever drank it, but I didn't understand that at 13 because I didn't know what an alcoholic was. My dad was having a business party, and my job at this business party was to carry these trays of these hors d'oeuvres around to all his business guests. And my dad always had a lot of business parties growing up, but he used to ship my older sister and I had a sister that was exactly 1 year older than I was, and he'd always ship us off to friends and to neighbors and to relatives. Well, for whatever reason, on this particular night, my dad felt that my sister and I were old enough and mature enough to stay at one of his fabulous parties and help out, and I was so looking forward to this night. I didn't get along with my dad at all. In fact, quite frankly, I was scared to death of my father, and the fact that he showed some type of faith or confidence in me was a really, really big deal, because by 12 years old, 13 years old, I'd already come to know that disappointed look in his eye that had become so familiar to me. So anyway, the party's starting, and my sister and I have these matching outfits, and we had our hair and nails done, and the house looked beautiful, my mother looked beautiful, my father looked great. There was valet parking in the front of the house, and I just felt at 13 years old so grown up, and it was all so Hollywood. And about 20 minutes before the party started, this guy walks in, and he's got a cummerbund, a bow tie, a white tooth smile, and a beautiful brown skin, and he's the hired bartender. And he walks up to my dad's bar, and he immediately knew what to do with all these boxes of champagne bottles, and he's popping these bottles, and mist is coming out the top, and he has these long, tall, elegant flute glasses, and he's tipping the champagne bottle sideways and the flute glasses sideways, and the bubbles are going from the bottom of the glasses up to the top, and oh my God, it was just all such a, exciting scene for me. And my sister and I propped ourselves up on two bar stools watching his performance, and my sister turns to him and she says, "What does champagne taste like?" And he goes, "Well, it's kind of sweet, it's kind of tingly, it tickles your nose." And he goes, "Why don't you try some?" And my sister said, "Really?" And he goes, "Sure, go ahead, take a sip." So my sister, who's exactly 1 year older than I am, takes a sip, and she sputters the whole thing out and says, "Oh my God, that's nasty." Well, like any good budding alcoholic, I see an opportunity for one-upsmanship here. And so I look at him and I said, "Can I try some?" And he says, "Yeah." My sister goes, "Tami, don't, it's nasty." So I take a flute glass and I just down the whole thing as quickly as I could. And the bartender's eyes go wide open and my sister's jaw drops. And now, I've got an audience, so we can't quit there. So I take two fists and I go boom, boom, and I chug down 2 more flutes of champagne. And I wish I could tell you that from my very first drink, I was at one in harmony with the world and all my childhood issues came to fruition. I can tell you that I didn't like it. I don't know that I didn't not like it. But I do distinctly remember within 20 or 30 minutes slurring my words, laughing inappropriately, and being put into my bedroom by that father I had so wanted to please with that look of disappointment and disgust that I had come to know so well. And within a very short period after that time, I started puking my guts out. I'm what you call a puking drunk. I wish I could tell you that once in a while I vomit. It's a little more feminine. But I'm the girl that does that projectile, shooting chunks into your tie or on your shoes. And if you went on a car date with me and we were drinking, you always had to drive real far to the right so Tami could puke in the curb. And I just remember, at 13 years old in my bedroom, I pull the trash can out and I'm puking my guts out. There has never, ever been a time, ever, that I have ingested beverage alcohol and not puked. I am that hideously allergic to alcohol. I'm a rare alcoholic in that I have never liked the taste of alcohol. I drink, as the book says, solely for the effect. I hear speakers get up and they talk about partying. Somehow I skipped that stage. I went from 0 to puke, in one drink. Anyway, I ran away from that home and just, our stories just close in a general way. And I ran away from that home to make a real long, complicated story short. If you were a girl and you had a budding teenage body, you weren't safe to live at home with my father. I had already been put in 2 temporary foster homes prior to the age of 15 due to the illicit nature of the relationship my father had with his 2 teenage daughters. And at 15, Child Services intervened through my high school. I had just started high school. And my sister had run away from home a year earlier when she was 15. So she's 16 and she ran away from home and is renting a little room from a family friend and still going to high school. And I was left alone with my dad at 15 years old. Problems started really quickly. Child Services intervened, a court date was set, and my dad had to leave that home until that court date, and I was also asked to leave my home as well. But I faced going into a foster home for the first time without my sister, and I was scared. And I didn't want to face a foster home in the courts without my sister, so I followed suit and I ran away from home at 15 and moved in for a short period of time with my 16-year-old sister that's just renting a room. And it was really kind of a shame because I really liked school. I had done very well academically in school, and at that time in my life, I was ranked number 23 in the state of California on the amateur tennis circuit, working my way up to become a pro in tennis, and dropping out of school stopped all that right away. So I lived with my sister for a month or two, and, we had no parents and no adult supervision, and that was certainly like the blind leading the blind. And then I became a 15-year-old runaway. And I lived the way 15-year-old runaway girls live in order to survive. Fortunately, I had a tennis coach that had been coaching me since I was 9 years old, and he was really concerned about my lifestyle and my living on the streets, and he had a vacant bedroom, and so he asked me to come and stay with him. And he was 44, his name was Dennis, he'd known me since I was a kid, but I was a very sexualized, precocious 15-year-old, and sadly, after I lived with him a couple of weeks, he fell to the temptation, and I became his live-in girlfriend. So I'm 15 and I'm living with a 44-year-old man. And Dennis had been previously married and had 2 children from a previous marriage, and they used to come and stay with him on the weekends. And of course, I somehow got drunk one weekend and I got myself into a blackout. And I am a blackout drunk, and for those of you that don't know what a blackout drunk is, I can just explain from my own perspective. When I drink alcohol, there are times, and I never know when it's going to happen or how long it's going to happen, where I just have complete lapses of memory. And it seems to be that I do these strange and incredible things in a blackout that, for God's sakes, I would never do in a sober state of mind, and I'm mortified the next day to find out what I've done. Well, I got into a blackout and had done something, and his ex-wife found out about it, and it jeopardized his right to see his 2 children on the weekend. And she basically said, if this girl's living here, and of course none of us told him I was under the age of 18 either, you can't see your kids. So I got scared, and he became scared, and so he said to me, Tammy, you're a really smart little kid, and you were doing really well in school. And there was, I don't believe they called it the GED exam. Back then I think it was called the high school proficiency test, but there was an exam that's been around since the end of World War II. And if you take this exam and pass a battery of 5 tests, you can get a document that's equivalent to a high school diploma. And my boyfriend, Dennis, at the time, was really concerned about me having no structure or discipline in my life at all, so he thought if I could pass this exam, he knew he could get me onto a local community college tennis team, and that would give me some discipline and structure back in my life so I don't start causing more problems for him. So he has me sign up for this GED exam, and certainly this isn't a thought that originated in my head, but when you're a woman and you're financially and emotionally and everything else dependent on a man, you'll tend to do whatever the flavor of the month suggests. So the flavor of the month suggested that I take this test, and I'm like, okay. So I fill out the forms, and 6 weeks later, I'm down at a local high school out where I live in Los Angeles taking the GED exam. And I remember the exam was like 5 or 7 hours, and it was like 5 big long tests, and I took those tests, but I was a really well book-read kid. I used to lose myself in books as a kid. And 6 weeks later, I received notification in the mail that I had passed this GED exam and that I received this high school equivalency diploma. So Dennis immediately, when we got that paper, took me down to a local community college where he knew the tennis coach, and he knew I was a good enough player to make the tennis team, and I did, and I played number 2 for that tennis team. And now at 16 years old, I'm enrolled in a community college. I'm a high school dropout, but I'm enrolled in a college with this test. And it's kind of scary to think that I passed this test with only like 4 months of high school. It says a whole lot for the test, right? Anyway, and I went into my first swearing off period. And when I first came to Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a lot of people that play a lot of one-upsmanship from this podium as well. And I would sit in the back of the rooms, and speakers would get up and say, I didn't draw a sober breath for 20 years, or I drank 24/7 around the clock. And I'd sit in the back of your rooms and say, well, you know what, then I must not be alcoholic. And the book talks about that we have swearing off periods, that we do have brief intervals of recovery, followed always by yet a worse relapse. But I don't understand that. I haven't read this book. Heck, I'm 16 years old. I don't even know what an alcoholic is. So I go into my swearing off period, my first of many, and the book tells us that some of us swear off alcohol with or without a solemn oath, and for me it's always with a solemn oath after I've gotten in some kind of trouble that I'm never going to drink alcohol again. And of course, I had really caused problems. I jeopardized my living situation because this guy can't see his kids because I'm living there. So I'm scared, and I swear off alcohol, and I'm never going to drink alcohol again. And I joined this community college, and easy does it is one of our mantras in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I'm a 0 to Mach 5 kind of alkie, and easy does it ain't never been a mantra of mine. And so I signed up for community college. Now I'm living off tequila, vodka, and a crazy relationship. And I go from that to I'm going to become studious, academic, tennis-playing Tami. And so I go into my swearing off period, and I take $100 and I go down to a local health food store, and now I want to buy brown rice and yogurt and kashi for breakfast. And I go to a local beauty supply and I buy expensive conditioner and emollients for my skin and some pretty little nail polish. And then I sign up for 14 units, and for the next 2 years, I conditioned my hair, I shaved my legs, I played on their tennis team, I took 14 units a semester, I made the Dean's List 4.0 GPA all 4 semesters, and after 2 years of that, I was absolutely nuts. And so at 2 years, I graduate, and I'm on the Dean's List all 4 semesters, and I had played number 2, and for a couple of months, even number 1 for their tennis team. And upon graduation, I received something called the Chancellor's Award. And that's where a few department heads picked some students that demonstrated academic and/or athletic excellence. And that Chancellor's Award afforded me an opportunity to go to any of 5 colleges in the state of California, 4-year universities. And that not entitled me, but it gave me an opportunity to go to those colleges, and for 2 more years, they were going to pay all my housing, all my tuition, and all my textbook and living costs. And guess what I did, guys? Of course, I'm an alcoholic. I quit. Because at 18 years old, I intuitively knew at some deep level that there was absolutely no way I could sustain that imposed upon structure and discipline of working out and eating healthy foods and studying all the time to keep me from drinking. I was exhausted. I'd already spent 2 years doing that. And I knew I couldn't do it another 2 years. So to heck with it, I quit. And they talk about that in my book. At my home group, I hear a lot of people say, as alcoholics, we have a fear of failure. Well, that's not what the book tells me. The book says that we actually have special skills, aptitudes, and abilities, that we can not only build a bright outlook for ourselves, but for our loved ones. And then we pull the whole thing down over our head with a senseless series of sprees. And that's the kind of alcoholic I am. And I venture to guess that that's kind of where that celebrity was in LA that we've heard about on the news. We build it all up, and boom, we pull it all down. And they talk about that in our book, Alcoholics Anonymous. So, you start talking about, you'll get a bachelor's degree, and I'm thinking a bachelor's degree, and then if I get a bachelor's degree, you people are going to start to have expectations of me. I'm going to have a college degree, and then I'm going to have to get that thing that every alcoholic fears, a job. To heck with it. I'm not afraid of failure. I've never been afraid of failure. You want to fail? Come to me. I can teach you how to fail in 0 to Mach 5. I'm afraid of success, because if I'm successful, you have some actions that you expect of me, and you have some expectations, and I know I'm going to let you down and can't fulfill them. I can get the most amazing guy in the world in my life, and I will systematically engage in behaviors until eventually he leaves me, and then I suck my thumb and say, pour me, pour me, pour me a drink. I can bring 2 of the most beautiful children into the world. I have a beautiful son and a beautiful daughter. And I will engage in behaviors many times against my own will until eventually the courts took my children away. And then I suck my thumb and say, pour me, pour me, pour me another drink. Alcoholics love to be the consummate victim. And newcomers, if you have one thing or one person left to blame, you ain't done drinking. Because until you can see that, it's about you and your actions, you're not going to stay sober. So anyway, I drop out of school now, and I do what I do best for the next couple years, which is bad relationships and drinking. But at 18 years old, I got myself a public drunkenness charge and an alleged DUI. I later got out from under it, because when they arrested me, I was laying on the top of my car drunk with my keys in my hand. And and they couldn't prove that I had driven there, so they couldn't get me on a DUI. But, again, that scared me. And so again, I went into another swearing off period, and I did the exact same thing that I had done several years earlier. This time I signed up at Cal State University Northridge, which is a local university out where I live in Los Angeles. And, the tennis career is kind of over now, because I've been doing boys and drinking for the last couple years. But I decided that I'm going to become a triathlete instead. So I go down to the local health food store, and I buy the local health foods, and now I've joined a local gym, and I meet a couple of men, of course, to train and run with. And the whole pattern starts up again. Meanwhile, during this whole time, I'm living with this guy, Dennis, and of course, we're doing the makeups and the breakups and the cheating and taking each other back, that organized insanity that we do in relationships. And all of a sudden, we're living in this condominium, and right next door, there's a vacant condominium, and this man moves in next door, and he's a doctor. He's an OBGYN. His name is Rick. And he moves into this vacant condominium, and of course, right away, I become friends with Rick. And he's a triathlete, and he's a doctor, and I'm going to Cal State University Northridge, and I'm taking a microbiology class. And I don't know, I've always had the guy I live with or the guy I'm married to, and then guys A, B, and C in the wings. You know, lovely to have a relationship with me. You know, living with someone else has just always been an incidental. And so I developed this friendship with this guy, Rick. And he starts helping me with my microbiology homework, and then I have him join my gym, and we start working out together. And we start running 10Ks and doing all that stuff together. And I knew that Rick had a raging crush on me. Those are the guys I pick. You show an interest in me, and I cling on to you like a vampire and then dangle you in front of the guy I'm with if he's not, you know, treating me with the respect I deserve. And this goes on for a while, and Rick unfortunately met me in, of course, that swearing off period. So by daytime, I'm academic, athletic, and intelligent Tami. But my swearing off periods aren't lasting as long, and they're becoming less and less frequent. And one night, Dennis came home from work, and we got into a bottle of tequila. I call it tequila if you're an alcoholic of my type. And I'm drinking tequila, and the next thing you know, we get into one of those knockdown, drag-out fights that we know how to do. And let's be fair, guys, girls, I swing my fists at him too. And this knockdown, drag-out fight resulted in this neighbor, Rick, because there was just a wall that separated our condominium from his. It became so loud and so violent that he called the police. So the police come out to our condominium, and they knock on the door, and Dennis is talking to the police, and this next door neighbor, Rick, that has a crush on me, is standing behind the police going, you know, where's Tami? Is Tami okay? Is Tami okay? And my boyfriend, Dennis, got rid of the cops, and they got rid of that neighbor, Rick. And then my boyfriend and I go upstairs and do one of those all-night, you know, passionate makeups the way we do. You know, we're killing each other at 9 o'clock at night. The police arrive at 10 o'clock at night. We're talking about each other's mothers at 11 o'clock at night. And then it's like, you know, oh, baby, you're my soulmate. I love you for life. Don't ever leave me, because we're just whack. And then, and I woke up the next morning, and I did exactly what's talked about in this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. That after a while, a drinking alcoholic cannot separate the true from the false. That after a while, the only life a drinking alcoholic comes to understand is that drinking life. And apparently that was happening to me. But again, I'm 21 years old. I don't even know what an alcoholic is. So I wake up the next morning, and I take a little liquid makeup, and I cover up the black eyes, the bruises, and the choke marks on my neck from the night before. I put a backpack on my back, and I go off to Cal State University Northridge like there is absolutely nothing wrong with this picture. 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I pull into the underground parking of that condominium complex. Now, I had been drinking the night before, so I'm hungover. I'd been beaten up the night before by the boyfriend, so I'm bruised and sore. And yeah, girls, let's be fair, I beat him up too. The cops had been called out to my house. I hadn't had any sleep because we did one of those all-night marathon makeups that we know how to do. I've been sitting in classes all day. So I'm walking toward the elevator in this underground parking, and my back is rigid, and my neck hurts, and my jaw is tight, and I'm just walking toward the elevator completely tightly wound. And all of a sudden, a thought occurs to me. All I have to do is go into the elevator, go up to the 3rd floor, past the first door, which is my neighbor Rick's, put my key in the 2nd door, and right above the kitchen sink is a huge bottle of vodka. Liquid relief is just moments away. And as I'm thinking about that vodka, all of a sudden I'm walking and my back starts to relax, and the pain in my face goes away, and my jaw relaxes, and I'm just knowing that peace is about to come. And if you identify with that, you're probably an alcoholic. I had not seen the alcohol, I had not tasted the alcohol, I hadn't even smelled the alcohol. Just the thought of a liquid called vodka that looks no less innocuous, more or less innocuous than the water in this cup, has so much power over my mind, it can control every thought and emotion that I have. But heck, I don't understand that. I don't know what an alcoholic is. So I'm just dreaming about that liquid relief, and I get in the elevator, and man, right behind me, I hear that neighbor Rick, who called the police the night before, say, Tami, hold the elevator. And you know, the last thing I want to do is get stuck in an elevator with one of those people that called the cops the night before, asking those questions that, for God's sakes, we never know how to answer. So I'm in the elevator, and I'm like pushing that closed door button, you know, and man, his hand just caught the doors in time. and in walks Rick, and it's Rick, my neighbor, and I standing in an elevator with that like deadpan silence. And prior to coming to Alcoholics Anonymous and having gentleman friends like Doug, who taught me how to have an adult intimate relationship with a man from the neck up, I used to use a tremendous amount of cussing and street girl attitude and a tremendous amount of sexual humor and inappropriate sexual behavior to kind of always keep you off your footing with me so you could never have an adult intimate relationship or conversation with me. So I'm in the elevator and Rick starts saying to me, Tami, you know, we need to talk. And I'm like, yeah, Rick, what the F do you want, man? Because like I've been effing up all night and I've been effing in school all day and all that, you know, street cussy girl thing. And he turns my shoulders and he just holds them and I'm facing him. And I'm like getting really uptight now and he's looking at me and I can feel his eyes just permeating me. So I realized the tough street girl thing didn't work, so I pull out the seductress and I grab his tie and I go, oh, Rick, is this a silk fossinol tie? Oh my God, you smell so good. What cologne are you wearing? Because I'm going to do anything to throw off these questions. And he took my chin and he jerked it up and he held it so I couldn't wiggle away. And he looked right down into my eyes with those beautiful brown eyes of his. And he said, Tami, he said, I've really come to care for you, not like those other guys. And I want to help you, but I don't know what's wrong with you. And man, those words just killed me because I have inherently known since I was a little kid that there is something very seriously defective and wrong with me. And I have spent the last 21 years trying to cover up to you out there that I know there's something creepy whack wrong with me. And another human being just looked at me and said he wants to help me and he's recognizing there's something wrong with me. So I got off the elevator that day and I went into Rick's condominium. And I told him the cry of every drinking alcoholic. I told him about my dad. I told him about the foster homes. And I said, one day I am going to finish my college education. And one day I'm not going to be financially dependent on abusive men. And one day I'm going to have my own job. And one day I'm going to have my own apartment. And one day and one day and one day. Because the cry of every drinking alcoholic is, look, I know my life looks kind of goofy right now, but eventually I'm going to get all my ducks in a row and it's all going to come together. And I believed it. And if you're an alcoholic out there, you believed it too. But I will say that I broke down and I cried for the first time in 21 years. Like the broken little girl that I was and that I always had been. No seductress, no sexual Tami, no tough street girl. I was just a broken little girl and I cried. And he held me. And I remember he just took my head and he put it on his chest and he was stroking I remember feeling his chest breathing and I actually let him hold me, you know, without wiggling away. And he said, Tami, I'm going to help you. I really have come to care for you and you're a worthwhile human being. And I left his apartment that night and I went next door, of course, to the apartment I shared with Dennis. And I was like exhausted. I'd been drinking the night before, beaten up, all that. Now I've got this like marathon crying session with this neighbor. And I remember I didn't drink that night. I went to sleep. But I woke up the next morning and I felt that fear they talk about in that book, Alcoholics Anonymous. That fear that comes in 100 different forms. That fear that guides an alcoholic's actions and an alcoholic's behavior. Because another human being saw the broken truth about me, and I am constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself about the role that alcohol is playing in my life, and more importantly, the role that I'm playing in the lives of my loved ones under the influence of alcohol. And so I did what any good alcoholic does when they feel the fear they talk about in that book, and they don't have a girlfriend, a sober friend like Mari that they can just call up and talk those dumb fears through with, and I went to the bottle. And I don't know, every alcoholic has a plan. It's never a good plan, but we always have a plan. And my plan that morning at 9 o'clock, I just poured a couple fingers of vodka and I downed it. And fortunately, it stayed down long enough to take effect, and I puked it all up. And then in my drunken stupor that morning, my plan was that things had not been going well with Dennis and I for a long time. And I knew that guy, Rick, next door, had a huge crush on me. And I had the key to his condominium because I used to take care of his cat and his exotic plants when he'd go off to medical conventions. So my plan in that drunken stupor that morning was to just take all my stuff from Dennis's condominium and move them next door into Rick's. And then get Rick between the sheets as quickly as possible and seduce the broken reflection of me that I saw in his eyes the day before. And so I spent the day moving. And are there any Al-Anons in the room? All right. Al-Anons, check this out. Not only did he let me stay, but 3 weeks later, he walked me down the aisle and married me, and that's the day he qualified for your program. And look, I don't have the time nor the wherewithal to go into all the devastating things that happened the next few years of that marriage. But what I will tell you is that I proceeded to punish Rick for everything that every man had ever done out there on the streets to me, and for everything that my father had ever done to me. And because Rick was pre-Al-Anon and pre a program of recovery for himself, he sadly took the punishment, and I damn near destroyed his soul. You know, Rick grew up in a severely alcoholic home. He made it to medical school against all odds. He was an air flight surgeon in the Vietnam War. And after being married to me for just a couple of years, he was stuttering and spattering, a nervous wreck, and didn't even know his own shadow. And I am not a funny drunk. I will damn near destroy your soul when I'm drinking. I am a hideously cruel and evil drunk, and I damn near destroyed his soul. Anyway, that marriage produced 2 children, and today I have a daughter, Chelsea, that's 25, and my son, Alex, is 24. Can you believe that? Doug saw my kids grow up in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. It's weird when I say their ages now. And through the grace of God, when I became pregnant with both my children, I had a physical condition called hyperemesis, where I could not stand the smell of perfume, I couldn't even stand the smell of cut flowers, and I could not stand the smell of alcohol. And I went an entire 9 months pregnant with my daughter without picking up a drink. I puked my whole pregnancy. I was really sick. 6 weeks after I gave birth to my daughter, my breast milk started to dry up, so I went to my OB/GYN, and my ex-husband's always embarrassed about this. And the reason my breast milk dried up is because I was pregnant again. 6 weeks after giving birth to my daughter, you're supposed to wait at least 8 weeks. And I'm pregnant, and this time it's with my son Alex. And I went another 9 months without picking up a drink. But 4 months after I gave birth to my son, I haven't had a drink in over 23 months. And I'm laying in my bedroom, and my kids had a little nursery monitor where I could hear them in the other room. And I heard them cooing, and my little baby son cooing, and my daughter talking to him in her little baby gibberish. And so I went into the room, and as I opened the door, I'm completely sober for 23 months, but I look at this little 1-year-old baby girl and this little brand new 1-month-old baby boy, and they're looking at me for something, and I was so painfully aware that I was a completely dependent human being myself, and I had nothing to give these little lives that I had brought into the world. And I felt that fear they talk about in this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And I did the only thing an alcoholic knows how to do when they feel that fear. And they don't have a God to pray to for strength. And they don't have a friend like Dwayne or Tia that they can just come and talk those dumb fears through with. And I went back to the bottle. And I went down very quickly at that point. I would say within a month or two, I became what we do call around-the-clock drunk. And to give you some idea of the way I drank alcohol, I would wake up every morning and I'd go into my bathroom. And I'd lock the bathroom door, and underneath my bathroom sink was a bottle of vodka. And I'm a puking drunk, so I used to have to take my long blonde hair at the time and put it in a shower cap because the barf particles used to bounce off the toilet water and get all up into my hair. And then I had a sweatshirt of my husband's from UCLA that I had cut the neck out of because the puke particles that got in my hair would get on my bedclothes. So then I'd stand at the sink with my shower cap and my drinking wear and, get ready for the morning ritual. And then I'd have to take a toothbrush with toothpaste, and I'd put toothpaste on the toothbrush, and I'd lay that down on the counter. Then I would have to plug my nose and uncap the vodka, because if I smelt it too quickly, I'd start retching and gagging, and I wouldn't be able to get enough down to get drunk. Then I would take a big swig off the bottle, recap the vodka, take the toothbrush with the toothpaste, and brush my teeth and brush my tongue, because God forbid I'd taste it, and I'd start puking it up before it took effect. And then I would slowly release my fingers and just pray that vodka would stay down just long enough to heat up my chest, and then I'd get that goofy feeling in my head, and then I'd puke the whole thing up. And every morning for the next 3 years, Mommy, are you done throwing up again so we can have breakfast? And if that isn't insane, I don't know what is. And to give you some idea of the effect that alcohol had on me, and before I share this, it's really important that you know that 99% of my drinking was extremely boring and extremely pathetic. And I think a lot of times we come up here at speakers and we share 1 or 2 highlights of our drinking, and people think wow, if I'm not jumping off of roofs or taking my clothes off on stage, I must not be an alcoholic. Well, I'll tell you my roof jumping story, but it's my only highlight, to be honest with you. The rest was pathetic. But I remember one day, I started to drink and drive, and I finally did pick up a DUI. And so my husband got this brilliant idea, my pre-Al-Anon husband, to get a full-time housekeeper to stay home and take care of me so I don't drink and drive, to take our 2 small children out to full-time daycare because I'm getting drunk during the day and they're witnessing it. Now, I don't go to school, I don't go to work, I'm married to a surgeon, I have someone home taking care of me in my house and someone else taking care of my children, and that's suicide if you're an alcoholic. And I remember one day after he delivered babies all night, he picked up the kids from the housekeeper, took them off to daycare, saw office patients all day, came home with the kids, and I had somehow gotten myself good and tanked and got on the roof of our 2-story house where we live in Chattsworth. And I'm sitting on the roof at 5 o'clock in the afternoon waiting for my husband and kids to come home. And we live in a cul-de-sac, so he pulls in and there's Mom, on the roof, wild and drunk, waiting for my family. And he parked the car in the garage, and he walked out of the garage, and I walked down to the very lowest edge of the roof, and I'm sitting there right by the rain gutter looking at my 2 children and my husband, and he goes, "Tami, what are you doing?" And I just jumped off the roof onto his back. He starts spinning with me on his back. The kids are screaming. The neighbors come out, and he reached up to grab me to get me off of him, and he had a huge metal watch, and it nicked me in the side of the eye and gave me a laceration, and the next morning I had a huge hematoma. And I walked into the Devonshire Police Division out where I live in Chattsworth and filed felony battery charges on my husband. They walked into his office with a waiting room full of women patients, he's an OBGYN, that had been going to him for 18 years at Northridge Hospital with an impeccable record before he ever married me, and they slapped handcuffs on my husband in front of his staff and in front of his patients for something he didn't do. And that was the only sober parent that Chelsea and Alex had. Those are the types of decisions that I make when I drink alcohol, people. I am not here to entertain you and make you laugh. Alcoholism is fatal. This is a fatal malady, and it tells us in the book that we must impress upon you the fatal nature of this malady. And again, just watch the news tonight, because that's what you're looking at. Anyway, it was very shortly after my husband spent that night in jail for something he didn't do that he found this horrible group of people called Al-Anon. And I'm an alcoholic that is deeply indebted to Al-Anon because you took away my greatest enabler and you gave me a husband and you gave my kids a father. But God, I hated you Al-Anons while I was drinking. And he starts going to these Al-Anon meetings, and of course, like any good alcoholic, anytime someone in my life is doing something to improve their lives and it's something I can't do, I have to put it down. So I said to him, are you going to go to your Let's All Feel Sorry for Dr. Rick Harem and let them circle you and pat you on the back, and putting everything down like a good drunk. And he goes off to his Al-Anon meetings, and I don't remember how long, but it wasn't too long. He came home after a couple of months of Al-Anon, and he said, "Tam, seriously, man, you can go to a hell in a handbasket if you want to, but I'm not going to let you take the kids and I with you anymore." And I saw something in his eyes, and I knew those nasty little Al-Anon women were giving him a backbone to stand up to the insanity of my drinking. And one more time, I felt the fear that they talk about. Excuse me. See, I can drink out of a cup these days. They were giving him the strength that he needed to stand up to the insanity of my alcoholism. And I felt the fear that they talk about in this book again. And now I'm just drinking round the clock because I cannot get rid of the fear. And everybody and everything near and dear to me is walking away. And I'm spiraling down. Anyway, he keeps attending these Al-Anon meetings. And he tells me, that he's done and he's going to start making some decisions. And so I pick a fight with him, and I get in my BMW, and I drive down to the liquor store, and I down some vodka, and I puke it up in a brown paper bag, and I get up on a freeway out where I live. And I don't know, this tends to run more with the women, but I'm one of those obnoxious phone drunks that the minute I'm in a blackout for some reason, I have this affinity to make phone calls. And look at all the women. They're like, yeah, we call them phoners in my home group. Anyway, I'm a phoner, and I'm on the 118 freeway out where I live, and I see a call box, and in my drunken stupor, I'm like, I'm going to make a phone call. And, I went to go make a phone call at a call box and somehow rammed my car right into this call box, which, by the way, if you don't know, that's government property. And 30 days later, I'm standing in front of a woman judge, and she's reading my rap sheet, and she says, "Tami, your rich doctor husband is not going to buy you out of jail time this time. You are going to serve some time. However, I will waive 30 days of a jail sentence if you're willing to go into a lockdown facility. Now, I hadn't mentioned this earlier, but by the time I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had been in 4 lockdown facilities from the age of 15 to the age of 30, never once for the diagnosis of alcoholism. It was always mental and emotional disorders, trauma due to childhood, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and later on I collected those other diagnoses that we often collect, bipolar syndrome, borderline personality. And I told those doctors what I had been telling them since I was 15 years old and first started appearing in those places. Look, the therapists tell me that I'm depressed, and a lot of my acting out behaviors and my craziness is a manifestation of my depression because of my childhood, and my drinking is really just a form of self-medication because of my depression. But the important thing is none of this is my fault. Later, when I came through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, for $1 in a basket, these crusty old-timers suggested, given the effect that alcohol had on me, I may be alcoholic. In that lockdown facility, I told those doctors I would wake up in the morning, I'd go downstairs, coming out of a blackout, I'd see broken glass, broken children, a broken husband, a broken home, and broken dreams. I'd turn around, go straight upstairs, turn the heating blanket up to Mom, suck my thumb, and think of ways to kill myself. And I did have one very feeble attempt at suicide while my little 6-year-old daughter was at home. And in that lockdown facility, they told me that being that I was put in foster homes as a kid and that I had no, love and nurturing as a child, that really this was a manifestation of my childhood, and the important thing is none of this is my fault. Later, when I came through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, these crusty old-timers had a name for a mother that was willing to take her own life while her child was at home without giving a flying hoot how it would affect those 2 children, my husband, or my family. You called it alcoholism, selfishness, self-centeredness. The world revolved around Tami's childhood pain. Forget my kids are in their childhood, it's all about me. In that lockdown facility, I told those doctors that I used to take money out of my husband's wallet, and in my swearing off periods, I'd join a local health gym and, of course, work out with all you men. And then I'd take you up to the pub after and buy everybody drinks on his dime. Always playing the big shot, always taking credit for money and things that I didn't earn. By the way, I've worked 16 of my 18 years of sobriety. Never once since I've earned my own paycheck have I bought a room full of anybody lunch on my dime. And in that lockdown facility, those doctors said, being that you had no love and nurturing from parents, you have to buy love and nurturing through money and material things, and the important thing is none of this is your fault. And you're taking your husband's money is really, your way indirectly of buying love that you never received. Later, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, you crusty old-timers had a really fancy name for that. You called it stealing. And not only did I steal my husband's money and buy other men drinks and lunch on his dime, always playing the big shot, but I took men to hotels, and as a wife and as a mother, I did what drunken alcoholic women do in those hotels. And in that lockdown facility, those doctors told me that really in those hotels indirectly, I was just searching for the love from that father that I never received as a kid. And for $1 in a basket, you old-timers had a name for that too. You called it cheating. By the time I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, my mother and husband combined had paid close to $100,000 in expensive lockdown units, therapists, and medications to find out that I was this hurt, victimized child that was acting out from depression of my childhood. But none of this was my fault. And for $1 in a basket, these crusty old-timers said, no, babe, you're a liar, you're a cheat, you're a thief, and you're probably just an alcoholic suffering from alcoholism. And God, I needed it to be so much more. Young people in Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a universal truth in Alcoholics Anonymous that's not mentioned in this book. If you don't like the old-timers, don't worry about it. You'll never be one. These old-timers are the most untapped, disrespected resource I have seen in Alcoholics Anonymous, and quite frankly, it's a crying shame, It's a crying shame. And I am so grateful to the men and women like Clancy and Johnny and Doug and Mari that walked this road before me, and they cared more about my life than they did about my feelings. And we have become too politically correct in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I was telling Mari, if you're loving your sponsor for all the nice things he or she is saying, you might want to get another sponsor, because I hate my sponsors, but they always tell me the truth. Anyway, so I get out of this lockdown unit, and in that lockdown unit, they started to address my alcoholism because, you know, and I'll be honest with you, you know, we do get misdiagnosed, and I'm not mentioning anybody else, but my particular story, I am not bipolar, I was not clinically depressed, none of those things were true. And they gave me antidepressants for depression, but I did not know that clinical depression is an acute symptom of alcoholism. And I could not sleep at night, and I had a lot of sleep problems, so they gave me something for sleep, and I did not know that insomnia is a clinical symptom of acute alcoholism. And I was anxious all the time and couldn't handle life on life's terms, so they gave me anti-anxiety pills. And anxiety is a clinical manifestation of acute alcoholism. And for me, and again, this is just my story, after 10 years of medication, psychotherapies, and institutionalization, nothing ever got better, because I was trying to treat a spiritual malady with a medical solution. And my problem was not medical. My problem is spiritual in nature. And so therapists and medications were not working for me because of my problem was spiritual. But I don't know that. Haven't read the book. Don't know what an alcoholic is. So I start coming to these, you know, court-assigned AA meetings, and I'm wearing low-cut tops and high-cut shorts and spending most of my time flirting with you men. But I will never forget my last drink as long as I live, because I took 5 of those 30-day chips in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm one of those obnoxious newcomers that wore like all 5 30-day chips on one belt buckle, like, woo, this is something to be proud of. I'd done it 5 times, you know, and I took my 5th 30-day chip, and I stood at a podium like this, and I told you all something about God and how wonderful my life was. But I'm still constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself. And what I didn't tell you is that Al-Anon had rightly convinced my husband to remove his 2 small children away from a mother that has had 10 years of therapy, 10 years of medication, the best doctors that money could buy, in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous, and refuses to get sober, and I'm dangerous. And he didn't tell him he's 50% responsible if anything happens to those kids. They said, Rick, you are 100% responsible if something happens to those kids, because she is not capable of making a sober decision. And what I didn't tell you is my husband had snuck out one night with my 2 children. He tried to evict me through the courts, and I was making such a scene in front of the kids that one night he just ran away with the 2 kids, and he was living in an undisclosed apartment. And I didn't tell you when I took my 5th 30-day chip that I hadn't seen my own husband and children in 67 days. But I was having fun. A lot of guys in AA were paying attention to me, and I knew I'd get them back later, but right now I was having a good time. So I get down off the podium with my 5th 30-day chip, and I go out into the parking lot to flirt with you men. And this mean old-timer, Cowboy Nick, down in my home group when I first got sober, used to come out and he'd tell the guys he sponsored, he'd tap them on the shoulder when they were flirting with me. And he'd say, stay away from this blonde girl, Tami. She is bad news. And I hated Nick because he was always interrupting my action. And Nick walked out and he said, Tami, you got a phone call. And I went into the clubhouse and I picked up the phone, and it was my husband, Rick. And he said, Tami, are you sober? And with the arrogance of an alcoholic. I said, yeah, Rick, I'm sober. In fact, look, I've just taken another 30-day chip. He said, well, Tami, if you're sober, our son Alex, turned 5 last week. And I signed him up for T-ball. And I didn't even remember my son's birthday. And he said, and the kids miss you, Tami. They're having a hard time. And he said, today's Alex's first game, and the kids want to know if you're sober, Tami. Would you like to come and watch our son's game? And I got the directions, and I drove out to that Little League field. And I parked my car, and I started to walk toward the Little League field. And as I'm walking toward the field, I look up, and from the distance, I see my husband, Rick, who works the hours that he works as an OBGYN, raising our 2 children out of a 1-bedroom hotel room, has got a team uniform on, and he's the assistant coach with a man from Al-Anon of my son's Little League team. And I walk up and I look, and I see my little son in the dugout, And when they called his name, he walked out of the dugout, and my little 5-year-old son walks out with these little baseball pants and these little baseball cleats. And he has this batting helmet on, and in T-ball, they hit it off a big cone. And every time he hit the ball off the cone, his little helmet kept falling down over his eyes. And my daughter was wearing a little sundress, and the women in Al-Anon were doing her hair. And she had her hair in little pigtails, because my ex-husband didn't know how to do that. And she was holding onto a chain-link fence, cheering her brother on. And I just stood at the back of the field, and I'm looking at my husband and my 2 children. And I felt the fear that they talk about in this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, because Al-Anon was helping my family to just go on with their little lives without me. And I did the only thing an alcoholic knows how to do when they feel that fear. And I went back to the bottle, and I found a guy with a cooler, and he had beer in the cooler, and I don't think I'd ever drank beer, but I picked a beer up off him that day. And 3 days later, I came to in some woman's kitchen holding an ice pack on the side of my face. And to this day, almost 19 years later, I still recall none of that 3 days. They actually found my car in that Little League field. So I don't know how I got down to the airport, which is almost an hour away from that Little League field. And some woman was taking her trash out in an alley behind her house, and she found me laying against the wall. And I had fallen and wiped out the whole side of my face against some concrete wall. But I had my backpack with me, and I'm in her kitchen with this ice on the side of my face, and she's giving my husband Rick directions to come and pick me up one more time. And it seemed like an eternity, and she didn't really talk to me other than she kept asking me if I was okay. And Rick came down, and he knocked on the door, and I know she and he had a few words in another room, and then he came in and he said, "Tammy, let's go." And I got into the car, and as I got into the car, he handed me a manila envelope. And he said, "Tammy, your mother and I were in court this morning at 8:30 a.m. This is a restraining order that says that you cannot come within 1,500 feet of me, of my business. I have moved back into our home in Chattsworth with the children. You cannot come within 15 feet of our home, and you cannot come within 1,500 feet of the kids' school, and you gotta go. Your mother and I have just received legal custody of the children." And I said, "Rick, where am I gonna go?" And he said, "I don't know, Tammy, but you gotta go." And he didn't say another word the whole way home. He pulled up to our home in Chatsworth, and he turned off the engine, and he just said, it was almost like he was so calm and mellow, no more insanity, no more crying, no more screaming. He said, "Tammy, I'm gonna give you 5 minutes to just pack up a few things." He said, "I want you to call one of your little AA bimboy boyfriends down at your home group to come and pick you up." And he said, "I promise you, when you find a permanent place to stay, I will send you money every month, and I will send you all your things." And he didn't say another word. And I walked up the stairs to that home that we had brought those 2 children home from 5 and 6 years earlier after I gave birth to them. The home that we had carpeted and furnished and tiled. I walked past my beautiful golden retriever dog, and literally, I was spiritually dead. I was a walking dead person. I was void. I was like a vacuum. I had no emotion whatsoever. I was just kind of walking. And I remember hearing this ringing and buzzing in my ears. And I took a gym bag, and I just threw some sweats and some T-shirts into this gym bag. And I went downstairs, and I said to my husband, "Rick, look, I know I need to go, but could I just say goodbye to the kids before I leave?" And he said, "Tammy, the kids have been through hell and back with you." He said, "They're upstairs in their bedroom sleeping with the housekeeper. You may look in on them, but for God's sakes, Tammy, don't wake those kids." And I went up the stairs, and at the top of the stairs was my son Alex's room. And I remember just looking at the door handle, and I took in a breath, and I opened the door, and as I opened the door, the light from the hall went right onto my son in his bed. And I looked at my little 5-year-old son in this huge bunk bed. And as I looked at my son, he looked just like his dad. And all of a sudden, I felt this love for my child. And it's embarrassing today to admit that he was 5 years old. And I felt this love for him that I had never felt for any human being before. And I just looked at my little son, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I just remember outlining his little heart-shaped lips. You know, their lips look like little hearts when they're little and they're asleep. And I just remember touching his lips, and he opened up his eyes. And my son asked me a question that every therapist, sponsor, every person, my mom, my husband had asked me. And he said, Mommy, when are you going to stop doing this, and when are you coming home? And in that instant, I became willing to do whatever it took. I never wanted to drink alcohol again. And I knew it like I know I'm standing here tonight. It was not the foster homes. It was not my father. Everything that ever went wrong in my life surrounded a liquid. It was over a liquid. I am destroying this little baby boy and this little baby girl over a liquid. And I'm so bloody arrogant, I'm going to defend my right to drink a liquid over the hearts of two little human beings that God gave me to love and protect. And if you got a mother or a father or a husband or a wife or a child crying over your drinking, suck it up. And get rid of the ego, because it's over a flippin' liquid. And we of Alcoholics Anonymous can absolutely show you a way of life that you never have to drink that liquid again if you don't want to. And even if you do want to, we can show you a way. And this is not some BS, esoteric, embellished story from the podium. I really did, this is true, I did hit my son's floor that night, and I just grabbed my arms and I said a prayer that I personally believe every alcoholic needs to say for themselves. Don't say it for your sponsor, don't say it for your kids, for yourself. And I did. Alcohol, finally, like the book said, had beaten me into the willingness of the dying. Not my sponsor, not my therapist, alcohol, king alcohol. And I did grab my arms and I said a prayer that I believe every alcoholic needs to say in some form or another. And I did say, God help me that night. And for me, it was like a megaphone from the heavens. Something I heard those 5 months that I came flitting in and out of here with my low-cut tops and my high-cut shorts and my sexual little attitude. And I heard it, and it happened to be Clancy's voice. Rarely do we see a person fail who thoroughly follows our path. And I knew I could do it that night in my son's room. I knew I could have the hope that you people had responsibly shared from the podiums of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I left my home that night, and I slept in the back of a van at my home group. And here I am, a surgeon's wife with a 5-bedroom house, a full-time maid, 4 cars in the garage paid for, and I slept in a dirty old van in my own puke, reeking of alcohol, and I never felt more at peace than I did that night, because I was finished. I was not going to quit drinking one more time. I never wanted to drink alcohol again. And I went the next morning and I heard that mean old timer Cowboy Nick that used to tell the guys he sponsored, stay the hell away from that blonde girl, she's bad news. And I surrendered my right to drink alcohol to Nick, to God, and to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous that morning, and I have not had a drink since. And I'm going to be really honest, I apologize, it's still hard for me to get through my story without crying, and to you guys it's a story, but to me those were my children, and I see it in my head. And I remember I spoke out of town a couple of years ago, and my husband couldn't come with me on that trip, so my daughter was my travel companion. And after I spoke, this guy walked up to my daughter and he says, and my daughter was like 22 or 23 at the time, and he goes, your mom has one of the greatest stories in Alcoholics Anonymous. And my 22-year-old looked at him and said, not if you were her kid, And the price I paid for my seat in Alcoholics Anonymous was to break the heart of a little 5 and a 6-year-old. So please, this is not a comedy show in Alcoholics Anonymous. We hurt people, and I think it's so important. As much as I hate to get up here and look snotty-nosed and red-faced, this is an ugly, ugly thing if we do not recover. Look, I'm just going to quickly wrap it up. The first year of my sobriety, I was one of the fortunate ones. I did receive custody back of my children. And through the grace of God and Al-Anon, my husband decided to give me a shot after a year of sobriety as a sober mom. And I did receive custody back of my children through the courts. And that mean old timer, Cowboy Nick, was there in the courtroom the day I received custody back of my kids. And I thought when I walked out of the court, he was going to put his arm around me and say, kid, you've done a good job the last year. And he looked at me and goes, I don't do what any good alky does and screw it all up, And that's the kind of love I get in Alcoholics Anonymous. At 12 years of sobriety, actually when I had 9 years of sobriety, my husband quit going to Al-Anon. He had a sober wife. I had gone back to school. I got my bachelor's degree, and I remember walking up to Nick a couple years sober and saying, "Nick, I'm going back to school, and I've signed up for 17 units." And he goes, "That's great, Tammy. Now go back and drop 11 of them." And, that crusty old-timer made me get my bachelor's degree 6 units at a time. And I got my bachelor's degree, and as part of my amends, I started to volunteer down at my children's school, and we'd play Duck, Duck, Goose and Red Rover, and I'd do little flashcards with their reading groups an hour a day in each one of my children's classes. And I turned to Nick, and they offered me a position as a teacher's aide at the school, and I took it. And after a year of that, I turned to Nick and I said, with my history, do you think I could ever become a teacher? And he said, "Kid, you can do anything you want to do in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, as long as A, you can do that thing sober, and B, you're willing to do the work." And I had to go to court and do a little bit of explaining, but I was able to get my teaching credential, and for the last 16 years, I work for the Los Angeles Unified School District. I'm an English teacher. I teach your kids. I teach your grandkids. If that doesn't scare you, it should. And at 9 years of sobriety, I'm bringing home a paycheck. I'm a responsible, sober mother to those kids. I finished my education, and so Rick quit going to Al-Anon. That's a fatal mistake, Al-Anons. And at 12 years of sobriety, he came home and he said, "Tammy, I've met another woman. She's younger than you, she's prettier than you, and she's a heck of a lot more fun than you." And I thought I was going to die. And I wish I could tell you that because I had good sponsorship and good mentoring that I just dove deeper into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and service work. But at 12 years of sobriety, I went upstairs, turned the heating blanket up to Mom, sucked my thumb, and started to think of ways to kill myself. And all my newcomer babies would say, "Tammy, you were a good wife, and you're a good sober member, and you don't deserve this," and pour you and pour you and pour you another drink. And then came the old-timers like Doug. And this time it was my current husband, Patrick. Doug's a good friend of his. And he walks up to me and he asked me what was going on, and I told him, and he said, "Look, woman, you are not the first one of us to be left from a podium of Alcoholics Anonymous, nor will you be the last." And he said, "You aren't," and also my sponsor had passed away 3 months after my husband left me, and 2 months after that, my little son fell so hard to addiction that I had to have him kidnapped in the middle of the night and sent to Utah for a year. So at 12 years of sobriety, I lost my husband, my son, and my sponsor, all within a 3-month period. And so I started sucking my thumb and thinking of ways to kill myself, and Patrick came along and he said, "You're not the first one of us to have to bury a beloved sponsor, nor will you be the last. You're not the first one of us to be walked out on or cheated on, nor will you be the last." And he said, "You're not the first one of us that has raised a drug-addicted child, Tammy, and nor will you be the last. Now get your crazy little butt out of this bed, quit sucking your thumb, and be the sober woman that we taught you to be." And I fell in love. And Patrick's not here tonight, but my current husband, we've been together 6 years, and he has 30 years of sobriety, and he's a good guy. And one more time, you told me the truth that I needed to hear. The divorce started to get ugly, and he got an attorney, and I got a better attorney, and it started to get nasty. We had a lot of property. I worked as a teacher. He worked as a surgeon. We accumulated stuff but had an empty home. And one more time, I couldn't sleep at night. I started to feel that anxiety and that depression. And so I went to my elders in Alcoholics Anonymous, and they said, "Tammy, what are you going after?" And I said, "Spousal support." And they said, "Kid, what's spousal support?" I'm like, "That's where we're married for 21 years, and then we get a divorce, and then he has to give me a bunch of money for 10 years. And they said, "Tammy, spousal support is about putting someone back on their feet again." And that man put up with your drinking. He put up with your sobriety. He put you through a bachelor's degree. He afforded you an opportunity to go to 3 meetings a day in the fellowship for the first couple years of your life. As far as we're concerned, that man has done his job putting you back on your feet again. And they said, "Why don't you call off the attorneys and just go to Rick like a sober woman and ask him what he wants?" So I went to Rick and I said, "Rick, what is it you want?" And he goes, "Look, Tammy, I want my medical practice and I want my new girlfriend." Ouch. And he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Look, Rick, I drank away the first 5 and 6 years of my kids' life, so I'm all about house and the kids. So I would like to keep the home and have the kids live with me, but we can just co-parent and share these children. And so he took his practice and his girlfriend, and I took the house and the kids, and no money changed hands, and Rick and I are the best of friends. I will say Al-Anon's, that because he quit going to those Al-Anon meetings and met this woman, nobody ever believes this, but I swear to God, she is a worse alcoholic than I am. And I'm not proud to say this at all, but she took him to the cleaners. And one more time, she destroyed his soul like I did, and I'm happy to say that Rick's back in Al-Anon where he belongs, you know. And, you know, there's been a lot of highlights and a lot of low times in my sobriety, but the highest moment in my sobriety is a couple of years ago. My current guy, Patrick, and my ex-husband, Rick, and I were all at UCLA, and they started to play Pomp and Circumstance. And my ex-husband's on one chair, and my current husband's on another, and they got video cameras, and they're filming my daughter. And my daughter was graduating with honors from UCLA, and she was the keynote speaker at her graduation, but she hadn't told me that. And my daughter gets up to the podium to give a speech. And all through my sobriety, I used to say to Rick, you know, you wear a lab coat and a stethoscope, and everybody bows down to you, Dr. Rick, and you get this huge paycheck to always tell you what you're worth. And I'm like going to meetings and going to school and folding little kid laundry and doing brownies and Girl Scouts. And, you know, this is like a thankless job. And, you know, I always say, kid, raising those 2 kids as a sober mom is the greatest gift you can ever give those children. And your paycheck is the health of your family. But when my daughter gave her speech, she got up and she said, you know, the first 6 years of my life were really scary because my mommy was an alcoholic, and I used to have to protect me and my brother from her all the time. And she said, and when I turned 6 years old, my mom got sober. And she said, my whole childhood from 6 to 18, I just remember my mommy went to meetings and my mommy went to school and my mommy took care of my brother and I. And she says, I just want to say that I'm graduating UCLA today because my mommy is my hero. And my ex-husband got down from his chair and he put his arm around me and he said, hey, Tammy, there's your paycheck. And, you know. And my daughter is an intelligent, articulate, feminine young lady. And she doesn't cuss like a drunken sailor like her mom did, and she doesn't pass her body around town. And old-timers, now I know why you asked me to dress like a lady, clean up my language, stick with you women, because I was raising a little girl. You told me great events would not only come to pass for me, but for countless others, and this is the great fact for us. My son, it turns out, likes to smoke a funny little plant called marijuana in a big glass pipe with water in it. And you know, if anything brought me to my knees in sobriety, it was my son's addiction. And after 2 outpatient programs and 2 inpatient programs, when I had 12 years of sobriety, I had to have him kidnapped in the middle of the night and taken to Utah to be locked up for a year to get him away from the drugs and the people that he was killing himself with. And you know, I went to my elders one more time in Alcoholics Anonymous, and my son still has an addiction problem, but I'm okay today. And I hope in some way that I can just be an example to Alex that Alcoholics Anonymous works. Turns out Alex doesn't think he's an alcoholic. He says, you know, Mom, I love Alcoholics Anonymous for what it's done for you and what it's done for Patrick, but I'm not an alcoholic. And I said, really, Alex, how's that? And he goes, well, Mom, you know, the few times I drank and you saw me drink, I like black out, and then I do all these like strange and incredible things. And apparently Alex doesn't know what an alcoholic is either, but you know, we pray for him to come into the rooms. And I know that guys like Doug and friends of mine, when they see Alex, when he does choose to come, they're there to help him when he's ready. And he's not my kid, he's God's kid, and I've released him. You know, I'm going to finally end in saying that the best description I've heard of recovering from alcoholism comes from a friend of mine, Johnny Harris. And Johnny Harris, when I was new, he told me, Tammy, in order to recover from alcoholism, you must cross the line from a taker to a giver. And I did not know when he told me what a giver was, but I darn sure knew in my newcomerness that I was a taker. And literally, I still just keep my program as simple as that. Any situation that I'm in, I really step back and ask myself, in this given situation, am I participating as a taker or as a giver? And if I am participating as a taker, I try to find a way most of the time that I can turn it around and become a giver. I'd like to thank the men and the women who walked this road before me and had the courage to hurt my feelings in the name of my life. Today, when I feel the fear they talk about in this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, I have a mighty, powerful God that I pray to for strength. And now I have a room of like 1,200 friends in Syracuse that I can just come and talk those dumb fears through with. I thank God for Alcoholics Anonymous, and more importantly, I thank each and every one of you in Alcoholics Anonymous for God and my sobriety. Thank you.
Let's thank Tami again.